weren't what they are today. I certainly hadn't learned about the online world in my police training because it really didn't exist when I joined in 1982. And it was in 1994 where I had to deal with a group of schoolgirls that had got themselves into trouble using technology. And that was the first time I'd even thought about the fact that technology might have been able to be misused. Because for me, being an adult at that point, to me it was magical. Like you press buttons and magic happened. Why would you want to misuse it? So from that first case of cyberbullying that was reported in 1994, remembering there was really listservs, bulletin boards and chat rooms, there really wasn't much else. It sparked an interest, and it was quite an odd interest because I'm not a particularly technical person. And my studies and my research that I had to do at home, because in those days Victoria Police was not connected to the internet, it became a passion to try to work out how we could best provide a safe opportunity for all people using technology. And I badgered and coerced Victoria Police to give me the opportunity to further my skill. I'm a pretty persistent person, especially when I believe in what I'm trying to get. And when I came back from my first overseas study tour, which involved I'm doing some study with the FBI and the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force team in Dallas, I was allowed to establish the Victoria Police Cyber Safety Project. So it was myself, some clerical officers and a criminologist. And we basically researched for 12 months and we looked at the whole issue of online safety, young people and adults with an intellectual disability. Prior to those times, the only online capacity for police in Victoria were the sex crimes, which was already established and was moving into the online environment. And of course, the computer crime, which was really, the money laundering and the fraud. So this was the holistic look at the whole issue.
Thank you. Could you give us a bit more of a rundown on what your real remit was when you started, how you built a team, and how then that remit expanded during this time? As you said, it changed significantly.
Yeah, so when eventually one of the assistant commissioners said that I'll give you an office space and you can sort of work out what you want to do. My ultimate aim at that point was to get Victoria Police to a point that had like a one-stop shop for investigating all these sorts of things, especially to do with young people, because I just witnessed what they were running out in the States. And these were what were called the ICAC teams, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force team. They were collaborative. They had investigators, they had forensic technicians, computer experts, educationalists, psychologists, and they were in one location. It was one of the first times that local police and FBI worked cooperatively together. And I thought that would make a great model for how Victoria Police could move forward. So that, in my mind, was the ultimate aim for me, trying to convince Victoria Police, like any hierarchical organisation that's steeped in tradition and policies and practices, that being able to do that was a very different thing. But really, we were looking at all the issues. So, we surveyed the members. What did they need? What were they seeing? What was lacking? What didn't they know? So that we could then put forward to the police command the sorts of things that we thought Victoria Police needed to move forward in this space.
And so how big did the team end up growing to? And
it was a very small team because what you have to realise is I had to beg, borrow and steal to even get this off the ground. And when I was invited to America, now let me tell you, the American government paid for my training, but I couldn't even convince Victoria Police to pay my way to America. So I had to beg to my local Rotary Club that funded my travel. Yeah. Victoria Police allowed me to go on duty, so that meant I didn't have to take leave, and they paid me, a meal allowance. But it was very, very difficult because I can remember when I was trying to pitch this as an issue, I for some bizarre reason, I don't know why, could see that the internet was going to cause problems, particularly for young people in the future and wider society. And I felt that being reactionary wasn't the best way. We needed to be proactive. Some of the things that were said to me when I was trying to get this off the ground, and we ended up to be only a small team of 5, were that I had invented cyberbullying myself to create a job opportunity for myself. I was also told that I couldn't tell the general public that cyberbullying could be a crime, because then their crime stats were going to blow out of the water, and that wouldn't look good for them. So there was still that pushback about the fact that, we really needed to address these sorts of issues sooner rather than later. On the day that I started this project, I made the rumour file, which is on 3AW in Melbourne, because I had arrived and there was no internet connection on my computer. I could not even log on online.
Right, and so by the end of your tenure, what were some of your greatest accomplishments?
So the greatest accomplishment was, still to this day, it is the only piece of research that any law enforcement in Australia has ever done that looks at it holistically. So it's still there. There was a whole lot of recommendations that were put to command. Now, the problem that I had was to get something through to command, you had to be sponsored, if you like, by an assistant commissioner who believed in your cause. And I had a very proactive assistant commissioner at that time who sadly retired just before the project finished. So it was rather sad that at the end it fell flat, because I didn't have someone to push it through the command process, and it's a very rigid process. But the report is still there. The recommendations, some of them have been adopted to make sure that Victoria Police were best placed, and that was like the education of members, which no police force is doing this very well. And I must say that what we have now in all the state police forces, when we talk about child exploitation investigation, are what are called jacket teams, JACET. And a jacket team involves federal police and state police working together. They're relatively new. The final jacket rolled out in Tasmania just earlier this year. Some states were a little bit against it, but we're getting there to work collaboratively. And that was the thing that I wanted. These victims need, almost a one-stop shop. They need people to understand what has occurred and how to investigate it. And sadly, the officers on the beat that take these initial reports are still floundering, that they don't even know that there's a law enforcement portal on Facebook, for example, in order to get information.
Thank you. And so you made the transition from your career in law enforcement to start your own business. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, that's a very interesting journey, because I had no intention when I came back from my study tours to America to leave Victoria Police. All I wanted to do was to make Victoria Police a better place. And I went from having a very supportive local manager to a manager that was not supportive at all, and at one point said to me, "I prohibit you from ever talking about cyberbullying again. It is not a police issue." And that didn't sit very comfortably with me, because I knew it was an issue for a range of reasons. And I sort of tolerated the pushback for a period of time. The project finished. I was sent back to be directly under the command of the unsupportive boss. And it basically got to the point that I thought, you know what, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I can do this, and I'm going to leave. And I basically walked out the door on a Tuesday, and I never went back. And I didn't have a plan, and I didn't have anything other than a belief in myself.
So how long ago was that now? 2007?
So that was 11 years ago.
11 years
this
ago.
March. So again, not the best. If you talk to any business analyst or how to start a company, I would fail dismally. But I had an idea, I had a passion, I had a belief, I had the knowledge. I was the only person in Australia with my specific skills, background and expertise, and I believed in myself. I did get a mentor very early on, adolescent psychologist Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg, who was also passionate about working forward to educating people about the perils of the internet, if you like. And he basically allowed me to believe in myself even more than I did.
So one more question just on, as we keep going down this track for a bit longer, cybercrime's obviously a pretty broad area, but you've been an expert witness in the Victorian Law Reform Committee's inquiry into sexting, amongst a range of other cases, and have that have emerged because of greater use of technology. How has the law changed, and what's your view on the impact for both individuals and businesses that are navigating the risks of cybercrime? And we'll sort of dive a bit deeper into some further questions after this.
So that was one of probably the proudest government inquiries that I was involved in. I've given expert evidence in Canberra and also in New South Wales and South Australia. But this one in particular was looking at the fact that through the advent of technology, we now had young people who were happily and willingly sharing naked photos of themselves, but were being charged the same as a pedophile would be. They were becoming registered sex offenders because they had a naked photo of themselves on their device. And that it came from a young girl in Tasmania that I had been brought into the school to work with the school, and the headmaster asked me to sit down with this young girl and have a chat to her. She had shared some of these photos. She'd been harassed to share them, and then they had been circulated around her community, and just to try to help her through that. And it was through that and a joint article that we wrote in The Age in Melbourne, a multiple part article about the fact that, the laws weren't keeping pace with technology. And not that it's ever advisable to share naked photos, because that's not a great idea. But if we look at what laws should do, they should protect society, provide a template for behaviour, and they should provide a prevention, and they should also, the punishment should reflect the crime. So what we were having in this case was a punishment that did not align with the severity of what was going on. So through that, we managed in Victoria to get an amendment to the child exploitation laws that allowed, in 4 situations and 4 situations only, a young person not to be charged. Because the thing with laws and with young people is that, when I started in the police force in 82, you charged the kid and they went to jail. I sent 9-year-olds to jail. Well, I didn't, but the courts did, because that's what happened. And we learned over time that incarcerating young people wasn't a great idea. So then we brought in cautioning so that we could sort of warn kids and keep them out of the justice system. Now, that's well and good, but the cautions were only available for crimes that young people committed. Theft, shoplifting, stealing a motor car, minor assault, graffiti. They certainly were not allowed to be used for sex offences. So then we had this dilemma of there was no discretion and the police's hands were tied. And what we didn't want was a generation of young people as registered sex offenders because they'd shared nude photos of themselves. So getting those 4 amendments in was fabulous. And we are the only state in Australia that has done that. And whilst there is always a crime in statute that can be applied to most situations online, what I think we need to do better is have more specific laws, because the deterrent effect is not there if people don't see common language in laws. So you won't find the word cyberbullying in most statutes that cover cyberbullying. You'll find words like stalking or harassment. So then people think, well, perhaps it's not actually a crime. So, I think I can get away with it. So we need the laws to be contemporary and we need them to move with the times. But we also need people to understand that, if you are misusing technology in any way, shape or form, there will be a law out there that can be applied to it. We just need to be a little bit creative.
Thank you. And so we're seeing the increased use of technology at the moment by our citizens and businesses, such as video conferencing platforms, communication applications and e-commerce technologies. As businesses look to have their staff work from home, or as they adjusted their business models as part of the COVID-19 arrangements, what are some of the risks a business should or must consider when picking what systems are right for them, or what platforms are right for them, particularly those businesses that have had to adjust their operations quickly during this time?
Yeah, and see, that was the big problem, because there was not much lead time in doing this. So the businesses that did it better were the ones that already had, a backup, if you like. If someone had to work remotely for, a medical reason or to care for a sick family member, where they already had a process in place that they can just, open up and swing across the rest of the organisation. So it really is telling that we need to be thinking outside the square, and that all businesses, big and small, have to have these policies in place about the fact that what if the worker is going to work from home, is forced to work from home, what technology are they going to use? Are they going to access the secure workplace system but remotely? Are they using a work-issued device, a personal device? And how's that going to impact on them? And of course, all those things were expected to be sorted out, in a couple of days. And it became quite messy, I think, for many organizations because, someone suggested platform A, it seems really good, yeah, easy to use, or I can get it for free. Free's fabulous, everyone wants free. But there's always a cost involved. And of course, unless you've done the risk assessment, the privacy assessment, the data protection assessment, unless you've got the rules, the guidelines and the policies in place, it's all going to, go pear-shaped if something happens. If everything goes along smoothly, well, then you can sort of bide your time a little bit. But if something blows up in your face and you haven't done that, then it's going to look bad for you.
Thank you. A lot of your work now focuses on child protection and safety. In an article in the Sydney Morning Herald, you stated that the current social isolation rules pose an increased risk for young children online. How can working parents ensure their kids are safely interacting with technology in these times?
Yeah, and I've been extremely vocal about some schools' poor use of technology during remote learning. And what I find is, schools are great at education and subject matter content, that's fine. But what they don't always have is a good understanding of IT. They don't have a good understanding of risk. They don't understand duty of care and how it applies to them. And of course, combined with the fact that the student is not physically on the premises, a lot of schools were floundering. And again, no policy in place, or a policy that was really wishy-washy and couldn't really be quickly adapted to the new norm that we've seen over the last 3 months. So some of the issues that I saw were schools using apps that have no educational merit whatsoever and are particularly dangerous. And the one that I've been banging on about for the last 3 months is an app called TikTok. Now, TikTok is not a safe app for anyone to use. If an adult chooses to use it, that's their choice. But it is not a safe app. It is known as a haven for child sex offenders. It is known for links to the Chinese Communist Party. It received the biggest fine in US history for knowingly gathering data on children and selling it. So what would possess any teacher or school to go, I think I'll run my PE lessons using TikTok? So for me, what that told me was either one of two things. One, either the school didn't provide guidance to the teachers, or the school provided guidance and the teachers chose to disregard it, neither of which is acceptable. I've got one school that quickly was using Google in education. They gave every primary school student the same password to log into that. Now, how can anyone with even no technical ability think that the same password for every student in a school is a good idea? So these are the things that are starting to blow up. And, the other thing too is, Zoom. We can all use Zoom. And if I'm limited to 45 minutes, I can do it for free. And this is really good. But the teachers didn't know how to use it. So they weren't using waiting room. They were electronically sharing the passwords. If you Google Zoom meeting passwords, there is a marketplace on social media for those. So the kids were uploading them so random people could Zoom bomb their lessons because that seemed like a good idea.
Thank you. What in your current work, what are some of the main pointers or tips you provide to schools when you're now working with them?
So I do multiple things with schools. I provide normally face-to-face education, but now that's happening online. And I work with classes from grade 3, so about 7 or 8 year olds, right through to year 12. So I do educational sessions in schools. I provide professional learning to teachers and parents. I also help with policy development. I review policy. I try to educate them on privacy and consent, which is another big thing. A lot of the issues I was having with teachers were recording Zoom lessons and then they were uploading those to public Facebook pages. There's been no level of consent obtained. In order for a school to use an app in education, you've got to have a risk and a privacy assessment done, and the parent has to provide informed consent for the use of that app. And if that hasn't happened, it can be a breach of the duty of care to those students. So it's about sitting back and thinking about what I'm using and how I'm using it. And if you're going to, something else that I started to do last year, not because I advertised it, but it just happened, was I was having lawyers contact me and asking me to provide court reports where schools were being sued. And, the only thing that, you've really got to prove was, could a school have foreseen, and it's exactly the same in the workplace, could you have reasonably foreseen this risk? And if the answer is yes, and you didn't act upon it, well, there goes your duty of care. And, to say that I didn't realize TikTok was bad, that's rubbish, because you'd have to be living under a rock not to know that it was a dangerous app. And even if you didn't read the news about the app, a little bit of Googling, is TikTok safe? You would find that it's not. So you are expected to do your due diligence. You're expected to provide guidance. If you've got your workers working remotely, they need to be working under a policy. And interestingly, I think this was in New South Wales, where a woman sadly was murdered by her husband as she was forced to work from home, and he was working from home. And that's now classed as a workplace death. And the workplace is liable now for the death of that woman.
Thanks. And I wouldn't mind continuing on down that vein. A recent report in the MIT Technology Review makes the case that Facebook needs to increase its efforts to moderate content on the platform. This is one example, but there are plenty of them, so it's not a Facebook bashing exercise, but can you share your views on the risks of the lack of moderation across platforms and what you believe an organisation's responsibility should be? So I wouldn't mind just exploring some of the ethical dilemmas that we have.
Yep.
And for example, should organisations be culpable for what kind of content is shared using their technology?
So if you look at most of the main social media platforms and you wade through the T's and C's, they will say things like, we provide this for your use. Here's the rules around the use. You are to be respectful, responsible, nice, kind. You're not to promote illegal activity, race, hate. There's a whole list of things. So basically, I'm inviting you in. I expect you to be nice, but it's not my fault if you're not nice. And that was sort of the premise of most of them. I will say that a lot of the main players now have moved beyond that to having some form of active, behind the scenes AI looking at content and words and things like that. But again, in Australia, if you are allowing content to be published on your Facebook account, for example, so if I have a Facebook account and you come along and you write something that is illegal, and I can be held to account for what you wrote because I've actually allowed it to be published, through the platform. The people that are writing the content or posting, absolutely, they are the ones that are held to account because they actually put the post up there. You have to look at then, how do we then manage the responsibility of the platform allowing it? And what we do know is, like if I use Instagram for an example, which is a Facebook platform, what you can do now is, as a user, if you don't want to see certain content or you want to block certain words that might be using to abuse you, there is a process where you can personalize your experience. Now, one of the biggest problems that we know is that the users are not utilizing the tools. So even though the security and the privacy tools have improved and the blocking and the reporting have improved out of sight in the last 10 years, we know there is only a small uptake in their use. And a lot of young people say, well, I don't trust them. Why would I bother to report it? Because, they're not going to act. But there is also a lot of behind the scenes stuff now that happens when it comes to terrorism content, child exploitation, image-based abuse, where a lot of it is weeded out before it even sees the light of day. And we don't see the media covering that. Because they don't always want to write a good news story about a social media platform, but there is a lot of good stuff going on behind the scenes. Everyone can do better. There's not an issue there either.
Thanks. And look, there'll be a number of ACS members and viewers tonight who may be developing software, new products or services, or leading projects for their respective organisations. We would get this a lot of times at various forums that ACS members attend. In your view, where does the ultimate responsibility lie with tech systems, applications and platforms? Is it with the tech professional developing the technology for their organisation? Is it with the executive group or the board who govern this, or does it lie with the end users of technology?
I think all three have a huge responsibility. So the user of the technology absolutely should be using it as per the workplace guidelines, for want of a better comment. The board, the hierarchy of the organisation are going to be, held to account as well. The app or the platform developer, if it's an in-house app or platform, yes. If you're using a multinational platform and app, trying to hold them to account for what happened, good luck is what I'd say there. But what we're seeing now is a push for apps and platforms to have inbuilt security. So it's called safety by design. So rather than invent an app and go, oh my God, this is amazing, and then go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. No, I didn't realize that. Let's try to, add it, which of course is not the best when you're adding safety as an add-on. Nothing's as good as it's inbuilt. And I know in Australia, the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner, Julian Mangrant, she is very big on this safety by design, in that it's forcing app developers and platform developers to inbuilt safety rather than see it as an add-on after something bad has happened.
Thank you very much. The Australian government, through the ADF, has previously declared that offensive cyber capabilities to deter and respond to serious incidents, particularly against offshore targets, were within the remit. Do you agree with the use of offensive cyber capabilities for law enforcement agencies or private enterprise, providing no laws are broken?
Yeah, and I think that, and I know there's a lot of issue with civil libertarians saying, I have a right to privacy, and what's on my phone and in my, my cloud and in my space is mine and should be no one else's business. But I think what we need to realise is we're not talking about Johnny and Mary from around the corner. We are talking about high-level criminals where there is a national or an international security concern. And when we're at that level, of course, we need the law enforcement and the defence capabilities to be equal or above those of the criminal. Because what we are still doing is really playing catch-up, because the criminals are always one step ahead. Not quite, but they get access to the technology first, then we have to come in and play catch up. So we need that level of cooperation. I get very angry when companies like Apple won't provide, the FBI, for example, with the, an unencrypted phone. And I think that was of one of the Boston Marathon bombers. These are not nice people. These people are putting a whole lot of other people's lives at risk. And I think we need more cooperation. Your right to privacy doesn't exist if you are a high-level international criminal.
And I suppose following on from that, Susan, just local police enforcement, who do you think is doing it well, if you can name any, and the use of dark teams to encroach on networks? Yeah,
so we have so the jacket teams that I mentioned, which are the joint anti-child exploitation teams now in each state and territory, are absolutely fantastic. And it does, because state police can use state law and Commonwealth law. Commonwealth police, the feds can only use Commonwealth law. So the fact that we can get the two together is great. The federal police is the key leading agency in Australia. So any online crime that's got an international component, that's going to come into the federal police for either them to divvy it out or to work through it themselves. So we've got to have that level of cooperation. If you look at, who did child exploitation well or the best in Australia, nothing comes close to Argos in Queensland. So they used to be called Task Force Argos, they're now called Argos. They were established over 10 years, 15 years ago. Inspector John Rouse, who now has moved across to head the new Federal Police's anti-child exploitation team. He ran Argos for many years. He's a gun. He has no peer in Australia when it comes to his knowledge. So Argos were the leaders in investigating child exploitation online, way and above any other state and territory, and they still do an amazing job. But now, at least with the cooperation that we have internationally, those jacket teams are doing it as well. Each state police will have anti-terrorism task force, anti-bikie task force, and they will all have an online component. So this was something that I was trying to get through to VicPol many years ago with my concerns about the lack of training. You know, yes, the specialist police that work in this space are well trained and expert, but you and I don't get to see those people, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who go into the police station, get Constable Jones at the counter, and they're the ones that are lacking in this expertise. And then there's the argument, oh, well, you know, we don't really need to educate everyone. But this is the way I look at it. If you look at crimes, a large proportion of all crimes have an online component in the 21st century. So the burglar that burgles the house, he sells the stolen goods on eBay. There's the Bitcoin stuff. There's the purchase of electronic gift cards to pay for different things. We know there's a huge amount of online crime in domestic violence. So the digital technology abuse of women. We know child exploitation, cyberbullying, harassing, stalking, image-based abuse. So most crimes that you can even think of, you know, even graffiti, because the graffiti artists film themselves and upload it to YouTube. So it's everywhere. And that's why we've got to raise the knowledge level so that people can use, so the intel capabilities of technology are available and are being used correctly.
Thanks very much. The cybersecurity review led by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet found that cybercrime is costing the Australian economy up to $1 billion annually in direct costs alone. Over the last few years, it seems that ransomware attacks have begun to rise again significantly from at least the early 2000s. And there have been several recent examples, such as Lion in the last few days, Toll Group, BlueScope, just to name a few. It seems as if it's just when, or the question of when. So a two-part question. What is your advice to businesses and their decision makers on how to mitigate or minimise risk? First one, and I'll ask the second one after you answer that.
Okay, so the first piece of advice I will give you is don't ever think not you, and don't ever think that you're smarter than these people or your systems are impenetrable. Because, you know, I remember sitting through an FBI training day of which I understood not a word of it because it was all technical and it was all dark web stuff. But at the end, all I know is we got the bad guy. So, you know, if there's a will, there's a way. There is someone out there that has the capability of doing whatever it is they choose to do. So you've got to make sure that your IT people, whoever you employ, are the best that you can possibly afford and that they know what they're doing. So being aware of what is out there, how to prevent. And of course, you're not always going to be a step ahead of these nasty people. The other thing is, what data are you holding that could be valuable? So, you know, banking and financial institutions, well, there's some good information there. A couple of weeks ago, the company My Budget was held to ransom. You know, My Budget holds banking, password, login information for a lot of people. That's valuable. So there's a couple of different sorts of hacking type people. There are those that want the data that you're holding because the data is valuable to them. And there are those that want to cause a nuisance and cause you to pay some money to get access to your stuff again, which is one thing you should never ever do, is pay any sort of online ransom. Because if you pay, and this was a perfect example of why you don't pay, there was a cardiology group in a hospital in Melbourne. They got hacked. They lost all their data for their patients. The hackers said, well, if you pay us this amount of money, we'll give you everything back. So they go, oh, great. They paid the money and didn't get anything back. Because what it's telling these people is that you have not only the capacity to pay, but the willingness to pay. And, you know, that's what they want. So, you know, you've got to be trying to be ahead of the game. You need, you know, I'm not the expert in back-end security and systems and things like that, but you've got to be able to protect the data. It's got to be, you know, well secured. And you've got to understand the landscape, and it's a matter of often when. So when you see this happening, you know, a recent one earlier was Mannheim. So Mannheim Freight and, you know, the great big car auction people, you know, they lost all their computer access for, it was over a month before that got back online. So it's out there. Work from the premise that it might happen to you, and be really proactive rather than, nah, I'm fine, and then dealing with a mess.
Thank you. And the second part of the question then would be, how can businesses get on the front foot and retain the trust of their customers after a cybersecurity breach?
Be upfront, honest, and tell them about it. The biggest issue with I'll use the My Budget one because I did some commentary on this. You know, the news went from being about the fact that My Budget was hacked to My Budget told none of its customers for 2 weeks. So that ended up being the story, the way it was handled, not in fact the data breach. The data breach was a side issue by the end of it all. So it's the same advice I give schools when it comes to any form of incident, be it on or offline, and businesses. Get on the front foot. So things move quickly in the digital space, and someone is going to find out about it, and you're going to be on the front page of the paper before you know it. So be upfront and honest. Hey, this has happened. We are aware of it. That's always a good start. We are working to minimize whatever it is, and keep your customers informed, or your clients informed. That's all they want. I think most people understand. I mean, Sony's been hacked. We know that big companies can be hacked, the best, right down to small companies. But I think it's how they respond, and it's that honesty of approach and being proactive and upfront that keeps the customer confidence. You know, I'm loyalty with SPG, which was bought out by Marriott. You know, they had a data breach. I got an email. We've had this issue. It doesn't appear to affect any Australians, but, you know, change your password as, you know, just to be proactive. So, you know, I appreciate that. I don't want to read it in the paper and then get an email from Marriott 2 weeks later. I want the first information about this to come from the company, not the media.
Thanks. Susan, you made a really interesting comment earlier. Get the best talent you can afford. What advice have you got for employees, particularly small to medium-sized businesses and startups who may not necessarily know where to find people in an environment where we know that we're lacking cybersecurity skills and that we've got a long way to bridge the gap to fill the vacancies that we're forecasting over the next 5 years? What are the skills and attributes you look for personally?
So I want someone that, you know, can walk the walk and talk the talk. You know, it's all very well having a great resume and can articulate stuff to me, but I want to see, you know, their ability to do the job that I might be looking for. And I think that, you know, whilst, you know, we don't go on to Dr. Google to try and diagnose what might be wrong with us, using technology to put the feelers out, to using platforms like LinkedIn and other professional networks, the Computer Society network, you use the relative networks and try to see who's out there. Yep, Johnny did some intern work with us. He was amazing, thought of things that we hadn't thought about, highly recommend him. And I think that in this particular industry, word of mouth goes a long way. So trying to get yourself known to as many people as possible can really help, you know, if you're trying to get a job in the industry. But upskill yourself as much as you can, because it's sort of like, you know, policing. There's all the theory stuff and there's all of that, but the practical experience is often what sets people apart. Their ability to problem solve, to work on the fly, to go with the flow, those sort of things, not rather than just textbook learning.
All right, thank you very much. To our TACS members and our audience viewers, please send your questions through the chat function. We've got a few more questions to go, and then we'll throw over those questions to Susan. Which areas of law do you think now have the most scope for change so that our society can effectively tackle the online world that we live in today?
So I think that what we need to do, and this is something that's doable, but it requires cooperation. So if you look at somewhere like the UK, the whole of the UK is one country. There's no states and territories. There's one police force, one set of laws. The government changes the laws and it's everyone. So it's relatively easy to afford change. America's a bit of a dog's breakfast of laws because all the states are different and the laws aren't even consistent. So if you look at Australia, we have the two-tier of law. We have Commonwealth law, which everyone has to obey, and state law as well, which in 99% of the cases complements Commonwealth law. So we don't have things at right angles, if you like. There's a few exceptions to that, but mostly all state laws are aligned to our Commonwealth law. So if you look at the child exploitation laws and the young people sharing nude photos, what we've got at the moment is the Commonwealth law saying it's still a crime and, you can be charged. Victoria Police saying, well, no, if these 4 things are present, you won't be charged. And the 4 things are no threat, fear, coercion, on sharing or threat to share, no adult involved, not more than 2 years age difference, and no other criminal act depicted in the photo. So we've got Victorian kids treated one way and kids in Western Australia treated another way, which to me doesn't make sense. So laws that are common, where there's commonality, we don't need a different law in Western Australia or Queensland. I would like to see the Commonwealth jump on board and make some amendments that are contemporary, because the Commonwealth law is the fallback, and that was the law we had: the use of carriage service to menace, harass or cause offence, use of carriage service to make a threat. They were the standard cyberbullying crimes. That was all we had to use. You could use stalking if you could prove a course of conduct, but everyone deferred to those laws. So I would like to see the Commonwealth come on board, especially with the child exploitation and the sharing of nude photos, because then that sets the benchmark. Because at the moment, the other states can go, oh, well, I'll wait till the Commonwealth do it. I'm going to, put it off. Why worry? I'll just wait. And while we wait, young people are unfortunately facing charges, in my mind, that they shouldn't be facing. I think that in all forms of online abuse, we've had great success in some image-based abuse laws. So this used to be called revenge porn. You're in a relationship, images were shared, or they might have been taken without your consent, and then they're shared on the internet, or they're used as a form of blackmail. So we've seen several states have specific laws. So for me, it's a specific law. We can't have a law for every conceivable incident. That's not going to work. But some of the key behaviours that we see that are negative, in my mind, it'd be really handy if we had a specific law, because it makes it easy to explain to lay people. Like, I still have people go, oh, but I'm going to agitate to get cyberbullying made criminal. Cyberbullying's been criminal since we had cyberbullying. We've got the laws. For me, there is often a lack of application of the law. Right? The laws are there, they're just not being applied correctly.
Thank you. Two-part question here. What are you most concerned about over the coming years in relation to cyber safety or cybercrime in particular?
Some of the things that bother me are the younger and younger children that are using technology unsupervised. And I'm seeing 7 and 8 year olds online unsupervised, no parent within cooee. And then the parent really bothered that they've seen something inappropriate, or a random person has contacted their child because, oh dear, that only happens to other people and not my child. So if you looked at when I first started working in this space, I rarely dealt with anyone under 14 or 15. It was 14, 15 and above. And then over time, it's just got less and less. I now deal with 8-year-olds sharing nude photos. I deal with 8-year-olds being groomed by predators. I never used to deal with that because those children were not there in this place of opportunity. So what we have to understand is, if we are going to hand over digital devices to 5 and 6-year-olds, which some parents are, there comes a responsibility with that, and you have to understand that this is the reality. And especially during COVID, and I mean, COVID, the restrictions will ease slightly, but it is going to be a new normal for a long period of time. There are dark web forums of pedophiles working out ways to converse with children, to target them during COVID. What do I say to them? How do I engage with them in a way that they can gain my trust during this tricky time? So we've seen a marked increase in child exploitation, particularly during COVID, a marked increase in cyberbullying and online harassment, and then subsequently self-harm and youth suicide. But for me, it's the child exploitation stuff. That's probably been the biggest mover in what I'm seeing by volume of all the sort of online crimes that I deal with.
Thank you. And on the reverse side, what are you most optimistic about for the future?
That without a shadow of a doubt, technology has been the best invention of my lifetime, hands down. And I'm excited to see where it's going. Virtual reality stuff, AI. There are so many wonderful things that we are having in our life now simply because we have technology. The medical advancements. the 3D printers for limbs. There's so much that technology gives us. I did some Oculus stuff in Facebook over in San Francisco a few years ago, and the potential to use that to train surgeons, it's just phenomenal. And I think that, what we have to do is we have to harness the benefits of technology, and that's what we have to focus on. Be mindful of the negatives and the risk. Of course, we have to deal with that. But, it's a great opportunity. These are great tools. But like any tool, it has to be used well for us to get the best benefit from it.
Thank you. And the final question we've been asking to all of our interviewees in this series, as COVID restrictions begin to ease, if you were in government, what would be the one policy lever you'd pull to get the economy firing again?
Oh my goodness. I think that if you look at a lot of the states, they desperately need tourists. Now, I'm not talking about opening the international borders because too many other countries have still not got this under control. But I certainly would be pulling the lever for travel right around Australia, so that those and all states have a big tourist. They require tourist dollars, particularly Queensland, who are really struggling. But I think what I would do is lift the border restrictions for travel. That would be my number one. Thank
you very much, Susan. And just quickly before we jump to audience questions, I've got a few slides, and I wouldn't mind if anybody was interested. We'll just get these up. But Susan, if I could hand over to you just to talk through them, that would be excellent.
Okay. Am I going to see what they are, or can you tell me which? I sent two, so it's going to be easy. Just tell me, is it the blue one or is it my website one that's up now?
The blue one.
Okay. So what I have done through COVID to try to help people out is I've prepared a 10-week education series. It's called Keeping Safe in Cyberspace. It started 4 weeks ago. So every Monday night, a video goes up on my Facebook page and then gets cross-posted onto my website. So that's a pre-recorded video on different topics, remote access during COVID, duty of care, cyberbullying, grooming, predators, a whole lot of stuff. Every fortnight, so yesterday was the fortnight, I do a Facebook Live event that's all free, and there's no cost for any of this. Last night's was Sit With Your Teenage Child, so it was a bring your own child situation. The one in 2 weeks' time is the 3 Ps, policy, practice and procedure, that's looking at what schools should be doing in this space. So that is up on my website and my Facebook page, but all the dates and the content is there. So if anyone's interested in more information, you can look at that. And then the next slide is just a screenshot of my web page. And up on the top right for memory, there's a little tab that says videos. That's where you will find all the videos cross-posted. Now, they're all there, but you will only be able to view them after they've gone live on Facebook. So Monday nights was sending nude photos and sexting. You'll have to wait till next week for the next one. But they're there as a resource, as is my website and my Facebook page for anyone that wants to, connect further and ask any more questions, either personally or professionally.
Thank you very much, Susan. We're really grateful for that. And now I've got a few audience questions that I'd like to ask you. What was the toughest challenge you've faced until now in order to convince society about the worst consequences regarding cybercrime?
The fact that people didn't want to hear, and, Victoria Police, and I loved 99.99% of my time with Victoria Police, but when I joined in 82, only 6% of police officers were female. So it was hard. I went to police stations where they'd never had a female before. I was the first female that those members had ever worked with. So there was a lot of underhand discrimination, if you like. I was a second-class citizen. I wasn't one of the blokes, et cetera, et cetera. And when I was trying to get this up in the police force, I had one manager say to me, "But Susan, you're blonde and female. You don't have much going for you, do you?" And, that just made me bite harder. But it is hard. And even when I try to talk about child exploitation now, a lot of people will throw back to my police career and they'll say, "Oh, no, but it's just the police officer in you talking. You're over-exaggerating it." you know, this is reality, this is my reality, and I will go out on a limb because I don't want it to be your reality. And I think that's the hardest thing. If people haven't experienced it themselves, they often don't want to believe it.
Thank you. Have you ever considered going back to the Victorian Police now that cyber safety has become a topic everyone has had to deal with?
No. Short answer, no. Because of the barriers, I suppose, that would still be there. And, you know, would they give me back a position with a cyber safety project? Probably not. I can do more good as a civilian. I mean, I work collaboratively with law enforcement right around Australia. I've got my contacts. I work with John Rouse still up at the Australia Centre for Child Exploitation. So I still do a lot of that sort of stuff. But, you know, when you're a member of a police force, by and large, you are confined to one little area, and that is it. And, you know, for me, I speak to, on an average year, 250,000 students right around the world. I speak to, you know, tens of thousands of adults. That to me is better. So my ability and my reach is greater when I'm not hamstrung by some of those constraints.
Thanks. Do we have a national cyber security policy to help us? Is there uniformity with cybercrime and cyberbullying laws around Australia? I think you partly answered this, but...
Yeah, no, there's not. So there is, if we look at cyberbullying, is it consistent? Yes, because we have Commonwealth law, and every state police officer in existence can access that law. Now, I was using those laws when I started. It used to be called the Telecommunications Act. It's now the Commonwealth Criminal Code Act. And the law used to be misuse of a telecommunications device. And that used to be primarily the bomb threat offence. So, you know, you made a bomb threat to a school, that was the offence. And then it's morphed into what it is today. So we've got those laws. But a lot of people don't know Commonwealth law. They just know the state law, and they can't see the word cyberbullying. So then they think it's not a crime. So I think we can do better to be more consistent if we can, you know, if we educate, you know, if once people are told that there's a law that they can access, well then, you know, that's a step forward. But we don't have consistency, especially with the child exploitation stuff. And there is still a reluctance of sometimes police to act. And I think we need to do better. You know, there's still dismissiveness with, well, you know, if you weren't on Twitter, you wouldn't be getting abused. So just shut your account down, that'll fix the problem, rather than actually, you know, understanding that it's a societal issue that we need to change.
Thank you. How do people know what apps are safe and what aren't? Especially if you haven't got a tech background.
Well, there's no such thing as a safe app. There's safer, and there could be safest, but there's not safe. Any app or platform that promises 100% safety and security are lying, so please don't believe that. It's very hard to know where to go and what to look for. But again, use the internet. You know, again, don't go to Dr. Google, but you can get most tech answers online quite well. So there's a really good website called Common Sense Media. It's a little bit like TripAdvisor. I explain it. So basically there are staff members at Common Sense Media that will put up reviews of apps and platforms, but they also allow input from users. So a bit like TripAdvisor, you can put a review in as well. So that's always a good place to start, Common Sense Media. Remembering that what you think is okay for a child might not be my opinion. So, you know, you've got to take that with a grain of salt. The Office of the E-Safety Commissioner, now we are the only country in the world that has a dedicated federal government department looking at online safety. They have a website, and there's there's information on that. I pump stuff out all the time. If I get wind of something I think people need to know, and if it's a problem in school A, it'll be in school B, or in, you know, a workplace here. You know, I pump stuff out. So, you know, latch on to people in the space. And people can always run things by me. People often say, hey, what about this app? I've never even heard of it. I've got to Google it, work it out, and then I'll make an assessment and get back to them. But you'll never get ahead. Remembering that all platforms will have a legal minimum age of 13. So little kids should not be on TikTok. They should not be on Instagram. Don't help your children. If you're a parent, do not help your child lie to get an account that they should not have.
What are the one or two apps that you couldn't do without?
I couldn't do without. Well, I do like I have two Facebook accounts. One is my personal page that's locked down and just has, close family and friends on it. My business Facebook page is where I share most of my information because my audience appears to like it. So I would, from a business perspective, I want to be where my audience is. And, I've got close to 13,000 followers on my Facebook page. And we're a very nice little community. I think I've only blocked about 3 people, very supportive of each other. So I would not want not to have Facebook. I like Twitter. I have a profile on Twitter and I share a lot of information there, but my key audience is not on Twitter. But I use Twitter as a news source. So, I don't follow celebrities or random people. Mainly my Twitter feed is my news feed for the morning. I would read my Twitter feed before I get out of bed to see what's happening in the world. I use it that way. Instagram I have because all my children have it. And, I share a little bit on Instagram. Again, lockdown. And LinkedIn as a professional network. I could probably do without LinkedIn if the world was ending and I had to choose one to get rid of. If I look at it from a business sense, it would probably be LinkedIn. But they're the ones that I use mainly because I connect with different people in different ways.
Thank you. What tips do you have for protecting oneself from cyber attacks when working from home during these extraordinary COVID times?
Look, that's a very difficult question to answer because if you are logged into your workplace system from home, you're probably going to be almost as safe as if you're sitting physically in the building. But if you're using, your own devices, there might not be filters on them, unsecured networks, of course, the risk is going to be greater. But it's going to get down to your devices, the security on the devices, and how you're actually accessing your work's network at home. I mean, most of the big companies are doing this well. I mean, the ATO, for example, everyone's working from home. I mean, clearly they've got that down pat in that the workers can access, the ATO database from their individual houses and still do that in a secure way. The same as a lot of banks, they're doing the same thing, governments, the education department, etc. So, it's really going to depend on the systems you're using. But again, be mindful of stuff, don't click on random things, ring up someone and double check if you're unsure, err on the side of caution. I would probably be extra cautious about what you're responding to, especially, electronically. If you're not sure about it, don't click, don't respond, and check it out first.
Thank you. And final question for the evening. How is Australia placed compared to other developed countries when it comes to cyber criminality and policies?
I think we're doing it pretty well. As I mentioned, we are the only country in the world that has a dedicated federal government department that looks at online safety. Now, when the office first started with Alistair McGibbon in charge, it was the office of the Children's E-Safety Commissioner, so it only dealt with young people. Now its remit is for everyone. They are looking at how they can, at the moment, their ability to get content removed that is cyberbullying only applies to a child victim. They are looking at now ways where that can be opened up, where they can actually direct social media companies to remove content that is bullying adults. I think that's where that will go. But, we've got some world first stuff happening there. If you look at the image-based abuse, which is criminalised right around Australia, we are one of the only countries in the world that has signed an agreement with the main tech companies so that if those images are flagged with the company, they basically, through using photo DNA and other processes, they can then they can get those images removed, and then they can stop them ever being reposted on their platforms. Now, if you're being threatened on Facebook and you go down this process, that means it can never go back on Facebook, Instagram, or on WhatsApp or Messenger. That's not everywhere, of course, but that's a start. Google now are removing image-based abuse images, child exploitation material. So, I think we are doing really well, and we are. With something like with what John Rouse and his team are doing with the child exploitation stuff. I mean, that's kicking goals. They've had some amazing arrests recently. What we would see historically is a lot of the victims of this online sexual abuse came from third world countries. So we might have the perpetrator, but the victim was in somewhere like the Philippines and India. we're now seeing, Aussie suburban kids caught up in this. And I think that's a wake-up call for everyone.
Thank you very much for your time tonight, Susan. Greatly appreciated.
That's my pleasure, and I hope that everyone listened found it worthwhile.
Hey, thank you. And thank you to ACS members for joining us this evening. Our Industry Insights Leaders series is happening every Thursday. Please register for our next sessions. Next week, we'll have Adam Shook, Head of Engineering at Canberra. Thank you again for joining us this evening.